Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahm, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Om Dhyanamoolam Guru Murti, Pujamoolam Guru Padam, Mantramulam Guru Vak, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Shalom friends, today we will start our reading session of fourth book, that is Sthiti Khand, and we will continue with chapter 32 onwards, in which Dam, Byala and Kala's liberation is discussed. Ramji asked to sage Vasishtha that how did Dam, Byala and Kala finally obtain their liberation? Like all other virtuous souls, and become released from the torments of hell, like children getting rid of the fear of yaksh, demons and pishach ghosts. Vasishtha replied, "Hear, O support of Raghu's race, what Yam said about them, Byala, and their companions when they asked for their liberation through his attendants in hell. Yam said that them and others would obtain their liberation upon death, releasing them from their demonic bodies, and upon hearing the accounts of their lives and actions." Ram said, "Tell me, sage, how, when, and from what source did them and others come to learn the accounts of their lives and how they obtained their release from the hell?" Vashiji replied, "These demons, transformed into a fish in a pool by the bank of the great lotus lake in Kashmir, underwent many miserable births in their fish-like forms in that same pond. In that marshy ground, they were crushed to death under the feet of buffaloes. Then they were transformed into the shapes of cranes frequenting that lake of lotuses. They fed upon moss and mushrooms and tender petals of lotuses. They had to live upon the leaves of aquatic plants and vines that floated on the surface of the waves. They swung in cradles of flowers, rested on beds of blue lotuses, dived in vortices of water, and flew under the cooling showers of rainy clouds. At last, these charming cranes and herons were cleansed of their brutish foulness by their vegetable food of sweet fruits and flowers, and by their pure beverage of crystal lake, the food of holy saints. Having by these means obtained a clear understanding, they were prepared for their release from their brutish states, like men who become able to distinguish and get hold of the good and virtuous qualities of Sattva and Rajas from the evils of Tamas, are entitled to their liberation. Now, in the happy valley of Kashmir, there is a city by the name of Adhisthana, which is surrounded on all sides by mountains and trees. It is very romantic in appearance. In the middle of that city, there is a hill known as Pradyumna Shekhar. It resembles a pistil rising from the center of a lotus flower. On the top of that hill, there is a building towering above all other buildings and piercing the sky with its high turrets that appear like pinnacles above its summit. On the northeast corner of that building, there is a hollow at the top of its towering turret. It is overgrown with moss and continually resounds to the blowing winds. There, the demon Byala, in the form of a sparrow, built his nest and chirped his meaningless notes like one who repeats Vedic hymns without knowing their meaning. At that time, there was a king in that city named Yesaskara, or the renowned, who reigned like Indra over the gods in heaven. The demon's Dama became a gnat and dwelt in that building and continued to barge his low tune in the crevice of a lofty column. It came to pass that the citizens of Vasishtha prepared a playground named Ratnavati Vihar in that city. They resided the king's ministers Narsimha by name. He understood the fates of humankind just as the astronomer knows the stars of heaven on a small celestial globe which he holds in his hand. It also happened at that time that the deceitful demon Kala was as reborn as a parrot and became the minister's favorite, kept in a silver cage in his house. It then turned out that the minister recited the poetic story of the war between demons and gods to the residents of his palace. The parrot's Kata happened to hear it. He remembered his past life, whereby he was absolved of his sins and attained his final liberation. The sparrow living on the top of Pradyumna hill also chanced to hear the story of his life in that palace, and he obtained his liberation thereby. Dama, who lived in the palace in the form of a gnat, also happened to hear the minister's recital of his tale and thereby obtained his peace and release. In this manner, O Ram, the sparrow on Pradyumna hill, the gnat in the palace, and the parrot in the playground all had their liberation. Thus I have told you the whole story of the demon, Dam and others, which should fully convince you of the vanity of the world. Only the ignorant are tempted to vanity by their errors, just like those led to the delusion of water in a mirage. Even the great are liable, like these demons, to fall low by their error. Think how one of these demons, who had reduced the high Meru and Mandara mountains with a nod of his eyebrows, was constrained to remain as a contemptible gnat in the crack of a pillar in the palace. Look at the other, who threatened to destroy the sun and moon with a slap, living at last as a poor sparrow in a hole of the peak of Pradyumna hill. Look at the third, who balanced Mount Meru like a flower bouquet in his hand, lying imprisoned as a parrot in the cage at the house of Narsimha. When the sphere of pure consciousness is colored with ego, it is debased into another form and another birth without changing its nature. A man's wrong desires make him take the untruth for truth, just like a person's excessive thirst makes him mistake a mirage for water, and thereby he loses both his way and his life. Only those men can cross the ocean of the world whom, by the natural bent of their good understanding, are inclined to study scriptures and look forward to their liberation by rejecting whatever is vicious and untrue. Those prone to false reasoning and hearsay, by rejecting revelations, are subject to various changes and miseries. They lose the best of life and fall like running water into a pit. But those who walk by the dictates of conscience and follow the path pointed by the Vedas are saved from destruction and attain their best state. O high-minded Ram, he whose greed makes his mind always long after having this thing and that thing loses the highest goal of his being, leaving not even ashes or any other trace behind. The high-minded man regards the world like a straw and shuns all its concerns like a snake casting off its skin. He whose mind is illumined by the wonderful light of truth is always taken under the protection of the gods, just as the cosmic egg is protected by Brahma. Nobody should walk in paths that are long and wearisome, crooked and winding, and surrounded by dangers and difficulties. Rahu, the ascending node of the moon, lost its life by its curved course to drink the nectarine beams of the moon. He who abides by the dictates of the true scriptures and associates with the best of man is never subject to the darkness of error. Those renowned for their virtues have the power to bring their destiny under their command, convert all their evils to good, and render their prosperity perpetual. Those who are unsatisfied with their qualifications and those who thirst after knowledge and are seekers of truth are truly called human beings. All others are only brutes. Those whose hearts are like lakes brightened by the moonbeams of fame have the form of Vishnu seated in their hearts, just as in the sea of milk. Repeatedly desiring enjoyments of what has been enjoyed and seeing what has often been seen is not the way to get rid of the world. It is the cause of repeated birth for the same enjoyments and sights. Continue to abide by the established rule of conduct, act according to the scriptures and good customs, and break off the bonds of worldly enjoyments, which are only vanities. Let the world resound with the renown of your virtues reaching to the skies, because your fame and not the enjoyments you have enjoyed will immortalize your name. Those whose good deeds shine like moonbeams and are sung by the maidens of heavens are said to be truly living. All others, unknown to fame, are really dead. They who aspire to their utmost perfection by their unfailing effort and acting according to the precepts of the scriptures are surely successful in their attempt. Patiently adhering to the scriptures without hastening for success and perfecting oneself by long practice produce the ripe fruits of consummation. Now, Ram, renounce all your sorrow and fear, your anxieties, pride, and hastiness. Conduct yourself according to the law and scriptures and immortalize your name. Take care that your sensuous soul doesn't perish like prey in the snare of your sensual appetites, or like a blind old man falling into the hidden pits of this world. Don't allow yourself to be degraded below the vulgar, but consider well the scriptures as the best weapons to defeat the dangers and difficulties of the world. Why endanger your life in the muddy pit of this world, like an elephant falling in a pit under the keen arrows of the enemy? Avoid and only taste its enjoyments, and you are free from all dangers. Of what use is wealth without knowledge? Therefore, devote yourself to learning and consider your riches to be only trash and bubbles. Knowledge of heretical scriptures has made beasts of men, making them miserable and unhappy by their unprofitable arguments. Now wake and shake off the dullness of your long, deep, and death-like sleep, like the torpor of an old tortoise lying in a bog. Rise and accept an antidote to ward off your old age and death. This prescription is knowledge that all wealth and property are for our evil, and all pleasures and enjoyments tend only to sicken and weaken our bodies. No difficulty to be your prosperity, and your detachment from the world to be your great gain. Conduct yourself according to the meaning of the scriptures, as they are supported by good custom. Acts done according to the scriptures and good customs produce the best fruits, that of immortality. He who acts well according to good customs, who considers everything by good reason, and who is indifferent to the pains and pleasures of the world, flourishes like a tree in spring, with the flowers and fruits of long life and fame, virtues and good qualities and prosperity. With this chapter 32 comes to an end, and in the chapter 33, effort, attains, ego, and its three forms are discussed. Vasishtha is continuing, knowing that the complete success of every undertaking depends on your effort at all times and places. You should never be slack in your efforts. See how Nandi gratified the wishes of all his friends and relations by his own exertions, and how he became victorious over death itself by his adoration of Mahadev Shiva by the side of a lake. See also how the Danav demigods, by their greater wealth and prowess, brought the better of the gods, who were filled with every perfection, just like elephants destroy a lake of lotuses. See how Marut, the king of demons, by means of his sacrifice through the great sage Samvarth, created another world like that of Brahma. See how Vishwamitra, the general, obtained the dignity of being one with Brahma by his great energy and continued efforts. By his austerities, he obtained what is impossible for another. See how in days of yore and the poor and unfortunate Upmanyu obtained his nectar-like food of cake and curdled milk from the milky ocean by worshipping Shiva. See how the god Vishnu devoured the demons of the triple world like a wildfire destroy the tender filaments of lotuses, and how the sage Sweta became victorious over death by means of his firm faith in Shiva. Remember how the chaste Ch33 brought back her spouse Satyavan from the realm of death by prevailing on stern Yam with the sweet politeness of her discourse. There is no great effort of any kind that goes unrewarded in this world. All impossibility is possible by the ardent pursuit. So, men having full knowledge of the Spirit and exerting their utmost devotion are able to root out their destiny of reincarnation that is filled with so much pain and pleasure. All visible things are full of danger in the sight of intelligence. There is no pleasure to be had from anything without its accompanying pain. Though it is difficult to know the Supreme Brahma and easy to attain supreme joy, yet Brahma should be sought at first as the giver of all joy. Forsake your, Forsake your pride and rely on your unalterable peace of mind. Consider well your worthiness in your understanding and remain attentive to the wise and good. In this ocean of the world, there is no way for your salvation except by your attendance on the wise. All your pilgrimages, austerities, and learning of the scriptures are of no avail to your liberation. He is called wise whose greediness, anger, and false conceptions decline day by day, and who walks in the path of the righteousness as taught in the scriptures. The company of spiritual guides serves to dispel phenomena from the sight of the devil, like invisibles hidden from the sight. In the absence of the objects of perception, only the Supreme Spirit remains in view, and the human soul, having nothing else to rest upon, rests at last only in the Supreme Soul. Phenomena did not exist before, nor are they produced from nothing. They are not in the existence, though we see them in our presence, nor will they exist in the future. The Supreme alone exists forever without change or decay. I have already shown you by various examples the falsehood of phenomena. Now I will show you the falsity of existence as it is known to the learned. Now that we have our passive consciousness of the three worlds, this being the sober truth of the wise, there can be no room for the unrealities of matter and illusion to enter into our belief. The world is whatever wonders are displayed by the active consciousness to the inactive soul. The notion of the world is derived from the rays of the central intellect, stretching to the circumference of understanding. There being no difference between the radiant point and the radiated circle, we acknowledge the identity of the radiator, the radius, and the circle. The opening and shutting of intellectual eye causes the notions of the appearance and disappearance of the world in continued succession. One unacquainted with the true sense of ego is blind within the luminous sphere of consciousness. But he who knows its true meaning finds himself within the sphere of the spiritual light and loses himself in the divine light. He who understands divine ego no longer retains any notion of his own ego, but mixes with the Supreme Soul like a drop of water lost in the waters of the ocean. In reality, there exists no I, or you, or any visible world, or anything else. Upon right reasoning, all these blend in the one ego, which remains and exists after all other existences. Even clear understandings are sometimes clouded by false appearances, like children seized with false fear of the demons or ogres. As long as the moonlight of consciousness remains hidden by the darkness of individual ego, the lotus lake of spirituality will not bloom. The feeling of the ego being wiped from the mind, the sense of the self and selfish passions will vanish of themselves from the heart, and there will be an utter end to fear of death and hell, as also to desires of heaven and liberation. As long as ego feelings float like clouds over the mind, there will be no end of desires growing in the heart like weeds in the plain. As long as the cloud of ego continues to overcast the mind and obscure its consciousness, the humidity of dullness will fill its sphere and prevent the light of consciousness from piercing through it. Ego pride is unmannerly in man. It is taken in the light of vanity. It is the cause of sorrow and not delight. It is like imaginary ghost to children. The vain assumption of egoism produces a great many errors. It leads to the ambition of gaining an infinity of worlds, as it was in the case of foolish demons. There is no error greater than the conceit that I am such and such a great man. There will never be a greater error to lead us to utter darkness. Whatever joy or grief falls upon us at any time in this changing world, it is all the effect of the rotating wheels of ego, turning up and down at every moment. He who weeds and root out the germs of ego from his heart truly prevents the tree of worldliness from growing out in 100 branches. Belief in the individual ego is the sprout of the tree of our lives in their endless cycles through the world. The sense that this is mine is the cause that makes ego expand into 1,000 branches. Our desires and the objects of our desires disappear as swiftly as birds in flight. Upon mature consideration, they prove to be only bubbles bursting on the fleeting, impermanent waves of our lives. It is because we have no knowledge of the one ego that we think ourselves as I, you, this, or the other. It is by shutting out our view of the only soul that we see the constant revolutions of this world and that. As long as the darkness of egoism reigns over the wilderness of human life, the gobbling of selfishness infests it with its wanton revelry. The wild man, seized by the avaricious demon of selfishness, is at an utter loss to satisfy his needs with any moral precept or spiritual mantra. Now Ramji asked, tell me, O Venerable Brahmin, how can we suppress our egoism or selfishness and evade the dangers and difficulties in our course through the world? To which Vasishtha replied, it is by seeking to settle the mind in the resplendent soul that shines in the transparent mirror of consciousness. In this way, it is possible for anybody to suppress his sense of personal existence. A close investigation into human life proves it to be a maze full with the false shows of magic. It is not worth loving or hating, and it is not capable of causing our ego pride. He whose soul is free from selfishness, who is devoid of the impressions of phenomena, whose course of life runs in an even course, is the man who can have no sense of ego in him. He who knows his inner self to be beyond the external world, and who neither desires or dislikes anything in the world, and who preserves the serenity of his temper at all times, is not susceptible of egoism. Whoever thinks himself to be the inner ideal, distinct from outer world phenomena, and keeps the calm equanimity of his mind, is not ruffled by the feeling of his egoism. Now Ramji asked, tell me, sage, what is the form of ego? Does it exist in the body, or mind, or both? Is it eliminated when the body dies? Vasishtha replied, Ram, in this triple world there are three sorts of egoism. Two are of superior nature, but the third is of a vile kind and is to be abandoned by all. The first is the supreme and undivided ego that is diffused throughout the world. It is the supreme soul beside which there is nothing in nature. The feeling of this kind of egoism leads to the liberation of man as in the state of the living liberated. The next form of self-consciousness is the knowledge of ego, as distinct and apart from all, and as minute as the 100th part of a hair. This ego is good also. This second form of ego also leads to the liberation of human souls, even in the state known as living liberation. The last and worst kind of ego is identification with the body and all its parts. This ego takes the body to be the soul or self. This third and last kind is this popular belief of mankind who take their bodies as parts of themselves. It is the basest form of ego and must be forsaken in the manner as we shun our inveterate enemies. The man debased by this kind of ego can never come to his right sense. Under the thrall of his powerful enemy, a man remains subject to all the evils of life. Possessed with this wrong notion of himself, every man is constantly troubled by various desires in his mind, and these expose him to all the evils of life. By means of the better sense of ego, man transforms themselves into gods, but the common form of ego debases a man to the state of a beast and his attendant evil. That I am not the body is the certainty arrived at by the great and good, who believing themselves to be of the first two kinds of ego are superior to the vulgar. Belief in the first two kinds raises man above the common level, but the ego of the lower kind brings every misery on mankind. It was owing to their baser sense of ego that demons, Dama, Byala, and others were reduced to the deplorable state as was related in their story. Ramji asked, Sage, describe to me the state of a man who has discarded the third or popular kind of ego from his mind, a man who attains the well-being of his souls in both present and future worlds. Vasishtha replied, having cast off this poisonous ego, a man rests in the Supreme Spirit in the same manner as the believers in the two other sorts of ego. The first two views of ego place the egotist in the ego of divine unity. But all these views of ego, in reality, are only different forms of dualism. When lost in the unity, all consciousness of distinct personalities absorbed in the Supreme One. Good understanding should always strive to its utmost to get rid of its common and gross sense of ego. Identity with the body in order to feel in itself the indescribable joy of the unity. The greatest good that one can attain for his highest state of joy is to renounce the unholy belief in one's separate personality in his material body. The man who gives up his identity as a personal ego in his body is not debased or lost, either by his indifference to or by his management of worldly affairs. The man who has rid his mind of ego by reducing his selfishness is indifferent to pain and pleasure, just as the satisfied are to the taste of sweet or sour. The man detesting the pleasures of life has his full bliss presented before himself. The man is cleared of its doubts and darkness, has nothing hidden from its sight. By investigation into the nature of the ego and forsaking this gross selfishness, a man crosses over the ocean of the world of his own accord. The man who has nothing of his own, who knows himself as nothing, and yet who has all and thinks himself as all in all, and who, though possessed of wealth and prosperity, has the generosity of his soul to disown them to himself, he truly is situated in the Supreme Soul and finds his rest in the state of supreme bliss. With this, chapter 33 also comes to an end, and we will rest today's session here itself. We completed today's discourse with the grace of Lord Ram, and we pray to Lord Ram that we again meet tomorrow for the reading of next chapters. Shiva Om friends.